Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, we're going to compare where the Timberwolves sit, especially defensively, right now versus where they were last year when it was all said and done. What's the same? What's different? We'll also talk about Rudy Gobert's impact on the Wolves' best lineups because it's massive. The Rudy numbers are once again through the roof, and we'll talk about what we learned from the two games against Golden State this weekend. One win, one loss. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by FanDuel. You can start your season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Tuesday, everybody. The Timberwolves are off until Friday because of, for NBA Cup reasons is why the Wolves don't play until Friday, which is a bit weird. Of course, they experienced this last year as well, but the big break in the middle of the season, that's not the All-Star break, is always a bit jarring. And, of course, the Wolves had a shot to go into it with a 5-game winning streak, but kind of fell apart against Golden State on Sunday. So I do want to talk a little bit about overall the two games in Golden State and what our takeaways are from both Friday and Sunday. I want to do that in the last segment. I'll kind of combine both of those to kind of get a sense for what we learned about the Wolves playing one of the teams that, well, they've been struggling. The Warriors have been one of the best teams in the NBA overall this season, and obviously still have an all-world player in Steph Curry. So I want to talk about what we learned from that. I want to start, though, with some big picture Wolves stats, 4 factors type stuff, where they sit now compared to where they finished last year. We did this about a week ago. It's worth another check-in now that the win streak's over. And I want to talk about some lineup-related stuff, and especially focusing on Rudy Gobert and just how impactful he's been to this point in the season. So a lot to get to here on the show today. A big thank you, as always, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on YouTube and on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And also a reminder about the new Locked On Wolves newsletter. I guess we've been doing it about 6 weeks now, but LockedOnDaily.com. You can sign up there. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for the Locked On Wolves newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com. All right, let's talk the Wolves offense and defense comparing this season year to date, of course, through, what are the Wolves played? 23 games. So we were more than a quarter of the way through the season. Compare that to where the Wolves finished last season on both ends of the floor, and talk a little 4 factors. I think the quarter poll is an interesting time to do this. And we've seen kind of the full Jekyll and Hyde of this Timberwolves team over the course of the first 23 games. And I say that it's not like they've had that many impressive dominant performances. We saw this run of holding 4 opponents consecutively under 93 points, which was clearly very defensively dominant. But really only a couple of the games in there were super impressive, like wire-to-wire dominant wins. And other than those games, we hadn't really seen it since like Denver, second week of the season or whatever. It's been kind of few and far between as far as truly dominating performances from the Wolves. And we did see it a little bit during the stretch, but certainly we have not seen it anywhere near the frequency we saw last season. Last season, when it was all said and done, the Timberwolves had the 3rd best point differential at cleaning the glass behind only Boston and Oklahoma City. They had the best defense, and it wasn't close. We've talked about this before, but 2.6 points per 100 possessions better than the next best defense, which is the 2nd largest gap of the past 20-plus years. Only the 2015-16 Spurs had a wider gap between their league best defense and the 2nd best defense in the league that season. Better than the 07-08 Celtics, right? The Kevin Garnett defensive player of the year season for the Celtics. Better than, the dominant early Giannis Bucks teams like the 1920 COVID shortened season team. Like, just completely dominant was the Timberwolves defense last year. And their offense ended up 16th in the league after languishing kind of right around 20th for most of the season. So a pretty good finish for the Wolves last season. And we could dig a bit, and we are going to go a layer deeper just for the sake of argument and in some additional context. I'm going to pull last year. We're going to talk about where the Wolves sat on December 9th. Now, we know the Timberwolves had a much better start to the season last year, which is obviously going to, we'll see. I'll give you the numbers here. Last season, on December 9th, come on, if I can get this to load. Last season on December 9th, the Timberwolves were 17-4. They're 12-11 right now. And the second best point differential in the league. They currently have the 10th best point differential in the NBA, according to Cleaning the Glass. They had the number one defense at 106.7, and it was almost to where they finished the year. Actually, exactly. Weird. 2.6 better points per 100 possessions, better than the next best defense, which is exactly where they finished the season. They had the 13th best offense last year on December 9th. Okay. Now here's where I want to compare the four factors, because I think it's a little more fair to compare the first, call it quarter of the season last year to the first quarter of the season this year. Well, the defense this year is now up to 6th. The defense is also 6th in opponent effective field goal percentage. Last season at this point, it was 1st. They were allowing an opponent effective field goal percentage of just 49.2%. This season, that number's up to 53%. And the best in the league is over 50%. So nobody's holding an opponent to an effective field goal percentage of under 50%. League best is OKC, followed by Houston, then Memphis, Golden State, Dallas, Minnesota. Wow. The top 6 are all Western Conference teams, which is a little bit surprising considering you would expect that they're mostly playing Western Conference opponents. I guess the schedule could be imbalanced early in the season, so maybe that's not necessarily the case, but that surprised me a little bit. We could talk about, so that they were best last season at this point, effective field goal percentage. Opponent free throw rate. Believe it or not, the Wolves got worse at this as the year went on last year, partly because they were so aggressive. I know that referees allegedly stopped calling as many fouls, later in the season last year. That didn't, I don't think, really bear itself out for the Wolves. But they, last season at this point, were 3rd in the league in opponent free throw rate, allowing only 17.3 free throws per 100 field goal attempts for opponents. This year, they're 9th, 17.9. So very similar, not quite as good. Last season, they were 12th in forcing opponent turnovers at this stage. This year, they're actually 6th. And they're rebounding better than they were last year. So the biggest difference is the gap of about 4% in opponent effective field goal percentage. That's the biggest thing. Oh, and then the other is transition defense, which we talked about pretty extensively on Monday's show. Jack Borman and I talked about it on the live postcast Sunday night following the loss of the Warriors. But they feed into each other, right? Transition opportunities for the opponent are going to cause the opponent effective field goal percentage to rise, to go in the wrong direction, because in transition, you're going to increase your effective field goal percentage. They're going to get more opportunities in the open floor. They're going to be more efficient. That's the definition of transition opportunities, right? Is I guess it's not the definition, but it's implied when you get a transition opportunity that it is very likely going to be a lightly contested or uncontested shot, or one that you're going to get fouled on. So the poor transition defense is directly feeding into this. And I'm not going to dig too deep into the transition numbers today. We did that last week as well. We've done it a couple different times where we kind of looked at just how badly the Wolves have been in transition defense this year compared to last year. And that is causing this. And that's also why they're doing so well. Like, they're competitive to where they were last year in free throw rate defensively. They're better than they were turnover rate wise. They're better than they were defensive rebound rate wise. The biggest problem is the transition opportunities, which skews everything else because there's so many easy opportunities and also just more possessions that the Wolves are giving up, more opportunities for the opponent. So it all comes back to the transition defense. And to be clear, the half-court defense was so dominant during this 4-game win streak that I honestly think it influences these numbers, in a really crazy way. I think it's almost an outsized influence. Like we talked about this on last Friday's show. The Timberwolves were the number one defense in the league going back 3 weeks again this year. Like, they had such a dominant stretch. And really, it started that way on Sunday against Golden State, too. Eventually, the Warriors going small wore the Wolves down a bit, and the Wolves struggled. We talked about this, but they struggle with pick and roll defense in this game to an extent because Steph is Steph. Now, against the Lakers on Friday, that's going to look completely different, and they very easily could hold them on. I shouldn't say easily. It's entirely possible they hold them under 100 points again. But the point is, the defense should be every bit as good as it was last year. And we'll talk about Rudy lineups here in a minute, but the Rudy-less lineups are still where we're seeing a lot of those issues for the Wolves. All right. I want to talk about that. I want to briefly touch on offense. Then we'll get into the Rudy stuff. We'll get into some lineups, and then we'll close by talking about takeaways from the Warriors series. So we'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets in the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. The next NFL game upcoming is Thursday night, Rams at 49ers. This line surprises me a little bit with all the 49ers injuries, and I guess both teams kind of playing for their lives. But 49ers minus 2.5 at home against the Rams on Thursday. It's interesting. Of course, no Timberwolves line yet for the Wolves game on Friday. There's lots of basketball between now and then in terms of the NBA Cup. Let's see. I'm just trying to see if there's any interesting ones here. The Thunder at home, minus 4.5 over the Mavs on Tuesday night. That probably is about right. I don't know. I would have guessed 3.5 probably, but the Knicks, Karl-Anthony Towns hitting a game-sealing bomb of a shot on Monday. They play again on, I guess that's Wednesday night. The Knicks host the Hawks. Knicks are minus 7 over Atlanta in that game in the NBA Cup. All right. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Again, never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's talk just a little bit more lineup, or a little more four factors, and compare the offense here before we jump over to some lineup data and talk Rudy. Last year at this stage, so again, December 9th, which would have been almost exactly the quarter pole. This year they played 2 more games on December 9th than they had last year, but I'm just going to use that calendar date. Timberwolves had the 13th best offense in the league. They were 7th in free throw rate, 6th in effective field goal percentage. This season, Timberwolves are 16th in free throw rate and 12th in effective field goal percentage. Now, the free throw rate thing is almost entirely Anthony Edwards' shot selection because of the volume of the shots he shoots. I mean, Julius Randle has a higher free throw rate than Karl-Anthony Towns did. So it's not that. I don't think is Rudy Gobert or the number of opportunities that they're giving Rudy Gobert. Like, I mean, we could look at his free throw rate. I'm pretty sure it's actually maybe even up a little bit this year. Let's see. Rudy's free throw, it's slightly down. But again, the volume of opportunities, like we're talking about a guy whose usage rate last year was 15. This year it's only 12. Like that volume of free throws. I guess we could also look at the per game number. Rudy's shooting a half, 0.6 free throws less per game. So a little bit, yeah. But that's not where the bulk of this is coming from. It's Anthony Edwards and the adjustment to his shot chart that is mostly altering what their team free throw rate is. That early it's the biggest factor for the Wolves going from 7th in free throw rate on December 9th last year to 16th this year. And if you want to use real numbers there, the Wolves were shooting 22.5 free throws per 100 field goal attempts. This year they're shooting 20 free throws per 100 field goal attempts, and that adds up, right? I mean, that's about 2 free throws per game, essentially. And over the course of the season or over the course of an individual game, that matters quite a bit. Effective field goal percentage wise, I'm not going to dig into the team shot chart here today as much. Certainly, there's the volume of 3-pointers hasn't changed drastically. Now, early last season, remember the Wolves shot more and more threes as the year went on. From from the jump this year, the Wolves have been shooting a ton of threes. They're 5th in attempts per game. They're 3rd in 3-point rate, and they're 9th in percentage. So it's not necessarily that, but it's also the decrease in free throw attempts. They're only, like I said, 17th in free throw attempt rate. They're 25th in attempts per game, just under 21 attempts per game, and they're 9th in percentage. So that all feeds into it as well. The turnover rate is predictably poor. It was last year too. Last year they were 24th in the league at just over a 15% turnover rate. This year they're 23rd at over 16% turnover rate. Not a surprise. The same issue that we kind of expected. And offensive rebounding, not something the Wolves do a ton of. They were doing it better last year, 16th in the league at this point, and this year they're 21st. That's just not a big part of their game, and we'll take it when we can get it, but that's not what they're setting out to do. So it's really free throw rate. A little bit on both ends, but especially on offense that's impacting them the most. And on the defensive side, it's transition. If the Wolves can button up the transition defense, and there's going to be anomalies here and there, like the Warriors playing small and Steph Curry slicing and dicing the Timberwolves pick and roll coverage with pocket passes, like that's a Steph Curry thing. Obviously, you got to figure out if you play him in his playoff series. But over the course of 82, it's not the pick and roll defense that's the problem for the Timberwolves, who are still a top 6 defense in the league, and I think ultimately will be a top 3 defense when it's all said and done this year. It's the transition defense that you have to worry about every single night. And if that doesn't come around, that's the biggest problem. And that's something the Wolves had to fix from 2 years ago to last year, and they did. They just have to button it up this year. And then on the offensive end, it's getting to the free throw line more often, which means Julius Randle being more aggressive with the ball in his hands, being more decisive, as we've said on this show, as Chris Finch has said, putting the ball on the deck and being decisive, not, I would say luring himself into a turnover by trying to be too cute with the ball. We've seen Julius do that. And going to the basket more. I mean, that's the easy one, right? Like that is, and I'm not at all saying the Wolves offense is, what are they, 17th in the league because Ant's not going to the basket enough, because he's also bombs away from 3 and he's making threes. It's the sacrifice of, and maybe this is something I'll do a little bit of tomorrow on the show, more like drill down more on Ant in terms of his shot selection, but it's sacrificing rim attempts for the mid-range stuff. That's the concern. And it's not maybe as drastic as one might think. It's just there's that many less shots being taken at the rim, which is the biggest issue, and that means that overall 2-point percentage for Ant is plummeting. I mean, last year he shot 66% on twos. He's 48% this year on 2-point attempts, and even though he's only he's shooting a little bit less from the mid range than he did last year, he's shooting a lot less at the rim. And so I think he's got to still take at least one of those mid-range shots per game and make it a rim attempt. He's got to find a way to get himself to the line more often. That's just going to be a super important thing he's shooting the lowest free throw rate of his career, even lower than his rookie season when he didn't know what he was doing. I don't think there's any shame in saying, he didn't know what he was doing, and he wasn't getting a star whistle. And he's getting more whistles this year than he did last year. He just needs to be a little bit more aggressive, getting downhill and getting to the basket. That's going to do wonders for this Timberwolves offense. All right. Let's shift to talk a little bit about lineups and specifically Rudy Gobert and his impact. And we did this a week and a half ago when I talked more specifically about the Timberwolves' 6 most used lineups. And we focused in on the common threads between those lineups, right? Like Jaden McDaniels was in the Wolves' 3 worst, most used lineups, if you will. And Rudy was in all the best lineups. That's still more or less the case, but the Rudy thing continues to continues to stand out, really. And I'm gonna grab the on-off, and then we'll talk about some specific lineups. And actually, here, this is just easier. The Rudy Gobert on-off, the only player with a better on-off than Rudy this year is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And maybe that shouldn't be surprising if you watched Nickeil play this year. I said this a while back. Pound for pound, based on his role and what the expectations are, he's been the Timberwolves' best player. I'm not saying he's better than Ant. I'm not saying he's better than Rudy. Not saying he's better than Randle. I'm saying that pound for pound, based on what his role is and what the expectations are, what the Timberwolves count on him to do on a night in, night out basis, it's hard to argue that anybody's been better than Nickeil. And the on-off numbers bear that out. The next best player with on-off is Rudy Gobert. He's a plus 6.5 according to Basketball Reference. And if we look at the various lineups, the Timberwolves lineups this year, like just straight up, their most used lineups. Their most used lineup, obviously, is their starting lineup. That's a 65th percentile lineup. Their second most used lineup actually doesn't have Rudy in it. It's got Nas in it at the 5, and no Mike Conley. It's got DiVincenzo in it instead, and that's an 80th percentile lineup. But the other, the rest of the lineups in the Wolves' most used all have Rudy, and their absolute best lineup that they've ran out there this year, they played 129 possessions with this lineup, is a 100th percentile lineup, 100th percentile on defense. And that's Ant, DiVincenzo, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Nas Reid at the 4, and Rudy Gobert. Now, quick side note, Jack and I talked on the postcast Sunday following the loss of the Warriors. He wondered why Nas didn't get run in the fourth quarter instead of Randle. And this is exactly why. Now, I know it was the offense that was a bigger issue, but this is still a solid offensive unit. And the other units with Randle next to Gobert are just okay. Like, let's see. The starting lineup is a better offensive unit than the one I just listed. But the other two lineups that have Randle and Gobert are 13th and 14th percentile offensive units, respectively. So you're better off having Nas in there with Rudy from an offensive standpoint than Julius Randle. And we saw that on Friday in the win over Golden State. Chris Finch did that. He put Nas out there in the fourth quarter. Randle played less fourth quarter minutes, and the Wolves ended up extending the lead and ultimately kind of cruising to a late victory over the Warriors on Friday. So that's notable to me is the Nas and Rudy thing. And we'll maybe talk some two-man stuff. Again, this is a long week where we've got the opportunity, got Wednesday's show and Thursday's show and really Friday's show, before the Wolves play the Lakers Friday night, to dig in on some of this stuff. So I want to do some Ant shot selection discussion. I want to do some two-man stuff. I want to do Nas and Rudy, Randle, Rudy. Like, we'll do big man pairings and what's working, what's not for the Wolves. So I do want to get into that a bit more. But the Rudy thing to me is really, really fascinating. And let's see. I was going to actually look at the best Rudy lineups here. So their best lineups with Rudy Gobert on the floor, period. Again, I'm just looking at 5-man lineups and cleaning the glass. So I'm not doing 2-man. Is of course the starting lineup, the lineup I mentioned that's 100th percentile, and then the 95th percentile unit that is the same, but with Conley instead of Ant. So that's a 4-man pairing, a 4-man grouping of DiVincenzo, Alexander Walker, Nas Reid, and Rudy Gobert. So again, the bench trio plus Rudy, and then if it's Conley, it's a 95th percentile unit, better on offense than the Ant unit. If it's Ant instead of Conley, it's better defensively, a 100th percentile defense, and a good enough offense. But the defense is so dominant. That pairing in 129 possessions has only given up 78.9 points per 100 possessions. That's insane. And you put Conley in instead of Ant, and it's still 94th percentile defense, and the offense jumps to 81st. And it's just overall a really strong unit. And that is a testament to Rudy more than anything else. Rudy lineups overall for the Wolves are 90th percentile defensively. And overall 73rd percentile offense, units. Take Rudy off the floor, and this isn't as drastic as it was 2 weeks ago when we talked about this on the show. But without Rudy, they're a 30th percentile defense. That was 7th, by the way, before the winning streak. The Wolves are a 7th percentile defense with Rudy off the floor. They're now a 30th percentile defense. Their best lineup with Rudy off the floor is actually decent defensively, 63rd percentile, and that's Ant, DiVincenzo, Alexander Walker, Randle, and Reid. All right. I think that's all I want to hit lineup-wise for today, at least. Let's talk a little bit about takeaways from the Warriors. We'll call it a series, the 2-game series over the weekend in Golden State. We'll do that next, and we'll close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Mint Mobile. With big wireless providers, what you see is never what you get. Somewhere between the store and your first month's bill, the price you thought you were paying magically skyrockets. With Mint Mobile, you'll never have to worry about gotchas ever again. When Mint Mobile says $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, they mean it. Say goodbye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. Ditch overpriced wireless with Mint Mobile's deal and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/LockedOnNBA. That's mintmobile.com/LockedOnNBA. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/LockedOnNBA. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. All right. Let's talk a little bit about some key takeaways from the Golden State games. Friday, the Timberwolves won in impressive fashion. They ultimately won that game by 17. It was obviously close until they pulled away late. And there was they were mostly in control. They were up, I guess they were only up 6 going to the fourth quarter, but they used the fourth quarter to pull away. Anthony Edwards was awesome. We saw great stuff from Jaden McDaniels in that game. Rudy was fantastic on Friday. Naz was awesome off the bench, 9, 10, 4, 3, and 2 off the bench for Naz. And I thought the Wolves did enough on the defensive glass. They ultimately did give up 10 offensive rebounds to Golden State, but it was more about what happened after they got those rebounds. And I thought they were good enough in transition too. Like all the stuff I was worried about headed into the matchup, the Wolves did well with on Friday. Andrew Wiggins got hurt midway through. He ended up only playing 19 minutes. He tweaked the ankle that he had, came in injured with that. They did a good job running guys off the 3-point line. I think, and we saw this a little bit early in the game on Sunday too. The Warriors really have to rely on making these threes to win games right now, especially with the way they've been playing lately. And they shot just 28% from 3 on Friday. And a big part of that was the pressure the Wolves were putting on the perimeter. The point of attack defense was awesome. Rudy had locked down the paint, and they forced the Warriors into a lot of long jumpers that they missed. And then the Wolves cleaned up those shot attempts. I mean, Rudy and Naz each had 9 defensive rebounds. DiVincenzo rebounded his position, had 4 rebounds in 25 minutes, 4 apiece for Conley and Edwards, 7 for Julius Randle, defensive rebounds only. I'm talking, he had 9 overall. But in just 24 minutes, Julius had 7 rebounds. We talked about how well Naz played. Like, to me, crashing the defensive glass, especially when the Warriors were missing so many shots, was a super important thing on Friday, and the Wolves did that. That was a massive, massive part of that game. And then, of course, the Wolves didn't shoot the ball great themselves, but forcing the Warriors to shoot only 28% from 3 and also forcing 22 turnovers with, again, a swarming defense from Minnesota on Friday was huge, and then dominated the paint. Rudy Gobert locked down the paint. It was all the stuff we just talked about related to the Wolves defense. They were a plus 14 points in the paint. They were, plus 9 points outside the arc. They were nearly at a draw. They were only a -2 at the free throw line, which is a good thing. Just a really, really impressive all-around performance on Friday from Minnesota. And they started the game the same way on Sunday. They ended up only losing by 8, but this was a game that, they led by 9 after the first quarter, 9 at halftime, terrible third quarter. And then they also, after the Warriors built an 11-point lead, they pushed back. Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Anthony Edwards did what they do, and it was actually a lot of Alexander Walker. The Wolves took a 1-point lead on the Ant 3 with under 5 minutes to play. They didn't score again the rest of the game. And it was, in some ways, a complete reversal of what we saw on Friday night. This time around, it was what had been a swarmy defense in the half court was still okay in the half court, but the transition defense was awful. Golden State had only 2 fast break points at halftime, and Golden State finished with 19 fast break points. They had 17 fast break points in the second half of the game on Sunday. And that, to me, was the biggest thing. That's how the Warriors scored 44 points, the most points the Wolves have given up in a quarter all season in the third quarter of this game, was speeding the game up, playing in transition, fast breaks, yes, second chance opportunities, defensive rebounding, and allowing some of those, that was definitely a reversal from Friday. And we talked a little bit already about playing small. And to me, Golden State's 1 of 1 with that, right? Like they're just a different experience to try and stop Golden State when they decide to go small. Like even now with their current lineup, that's a really difficult match for anybody. And it was a good adjustment by Steve Kerr. But the Wolves, besides just like the offensive ball movement just completely stopping at the end of the game and Ant missing a bunch of shots, they still did enough to win. And I was still encouraged by the 2 games in Golden State because they continued for the most part, except for that third quarter, which again was mostly transition defense. They mostly played defense. We'll call it what, 6.5 quarters or so of the 8 quarters in Golden State. The defense was still all world defense. It was still a top 3 defense worthy of a top 3 defense in the league. And it just kind of unraveled a bit on Sunday. And now upcoming, I mean, like with the way the schedule looks, I mean, come on. Friday against the Lakers, that's obviously very winnable. We'll talk about that matchup later. Lakers are still scuffling a bit. I know they beat Portland on Sunday, but very winnable game Friday. At San Antonio, get a bit of revenge on Wemby at San Antonio. And then you get Cat coming to Target Center on December 19th, and then Golden State at home on December 21st, which will be a lot of fun. And then the schedule starts to lighten up a little bit. Actually, I say that, not really. No, it doesn't. It's a really tough schedule. They don't play other than, I mean, Atlanta's playing better now too. But outside of Atlanta, they get San Antonio twice. And then it's like Detroit on January 4th is the next non-playoff team the Wolves play. They haven't played New Orleans yet. I did this the other day. This feels like something we'll talk about at some point. But go through the worst teams in the league. They haven't played the 3-win Wizards. They're 3-19. They haven't played the 5-20 Pelicans. They haven't played the 5-18 Jazz. I know that they've lost twice to the 8-16 Portland Trailblazers, but literally the 3 worst teams in the league, they haven't played at all. And so that's going to help when eventually that gets mixed in there, hopefully, or at least it should. Who knows with the way, the way the Wolves have already lost to Portland twice and lost to Toronto once. And hopefully it's not really shades of the Wolves from 2 years ago with playing poorly against bad teams. But anyway, definitely some opportunities here coming up for the Timberwolves to build on what they did over this 4-game winning streak, and really including the loss against the Warriors. So much of that game, they still played fairly well, that I'm encouraged coming out of it. All right. I want to deep dive on Ant's shot selection this year. I want to talk about big man pairings for the Wolves. Now that we have a little bit more data, we did this before the season in the wake of the Cat trade. I want to do it at the quarter poll with Julius and Rudy, and Julius and Nas and Rudy. Compare some of that to the Nas Rudy minutes and the Rudy Cat minutes and Nas Cat minutes from last year. So we'll do some of that here over the next couple of days as we get you ready for Wolves action on Friday against the Lakers here in this weird NBA Cup. I don't know, NBA Cup. What's the word I'm looking for? NBA Cup induced weird break in the schedule. All right. That's all we got for you today here on the show. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And of course, a reminder to sign up for the Locked On Wolves daily newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Again, LockedOnDaily.com to sign up for the Locked On Wolves newsletter. The Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.